So let's start by diving deeper into core components like text and view. And for this, I'll actually delete this status bar component and also this import. If I save that, this is updated here on those devices and not much change there. So we don't need this right now. I also will delete this text component and save that so that for now we have a blank screen. And now let's try re-adding the text like this. Hello world between the view without the surrounding text. If we do that, we notice that we get an error down here. We get an error that text strings must be rendered within a text component, which is actually a quite helpful error message, which tells us in a pretty clear way what's wrong. Now, before we fix this, let's also take a look at those devices, those simulators, and here we also get the same error message. And this is actually something important, which is why I'm showing this. It's different than what you might know from web development. If you would build a web app, and this would be React for the web, and this would maybe be a div instead of a view, then this kind of code would be fine. We could put text inside of a div there. React Native and native platforms, to be precise, are stricter than that. You can't put a text into a view, which is pretty much the equivalent to a div, because it's not meant for that. Instead, views, so the equivalent to divs in the web world, views are meant to generally build boxes and containers that hold other content. A view could hold some text wrapped into a text component. It could also hold a text input or a button or an image or anything like this. But you have to put the content into an element that is able to display it. And the view is only able to hold other components, it's not able to display text. And that is something really important to understand. If you want to display text, for example, you have to use this text component and wrap the text opening and closing tags around your text. And if you do this and save, then this updates and works again. But that's a first important takeaway. Even though we can kind of compare those components to HTML, and even though it looks kind of similar, there are important differences. Now, what you will often do when building React Native apps is you will build more complex user interfaces that don't just have one piece of text inside of them. And what's important to understand then is that those different core components have different roles. The text is a component that's used for, guess what, displaying text. The view is a component that's meant to hold and lay out other components. Now, we will learn more about laying things out with help of styling in a couple of minutes, but the idea behind the view component is that you typically have multiple child components in there. For example, another text, another piece of text. In a text component, as you learned, but now we got two of them. And we group them together in a view, just as we might group them together in a div if this would be for the web. Now, in the web, we also have other components like section or article. Here in React Native world, it's just the view. This is our container component that we use for holding other components. And of course, those other components also can be nested. We could have another view which actually holds this inner text. So this is all something that's totally fine and something you will typically build when building more complex user interfaces with React Native. The view then makes it very easy to use styling, into which we'll dive in a second, to control which of its child elements should be positioned. Of course, we don't just have a view and text though. If you take a look at the official website, the official React Native documentation site, you'll learn that there are more React Native core components, and those components fulfill different purposes. we got view and text, which are two of the most important and commonly used components, but we also could display an image, add some scrolling, something we'll do later as well, or add a text input, which allows users to enter some text. We could also add a button. And indeed, that is what I'll do here. Below this text, I'll add a button, but for this we need to import it. And that is also important and an important difference compared to React for the web. With React for the web, you don't need to import the HTML elements you might be using. With React Native, you do. If you want to display a button, you have to import this core component from React Native. And then you can add your button. Another important difference is that, unlike for the web, you don't build a button like this by adding the caption between the opening and closing tags. Instead, it's a self-closing element where you add a title prop, and then you add your title here. This would now display a button as well, with the kind of default styling and tab effects you would expect for the different platforms. And you see that the look adjusts to the underlying platform. It looks like an iOS button on iOS and like an Android button on Android. But of course, the button doesn't do anything yet because I haven't added any listener. Now we will add interactivity and learn how that works later. For the moment, let's just add the button here, and let's understand that we always work with core components like this, where every component has its clearly defined purpose. And you build your overall UI by combining those components. But of course, a UI is not just about combining components, it's also about styling them. And that's therefore what we'll explore next.